Reading Death in the Afterlife in Byzantium, The Fate of the Soul, and Theology, Liturgy, and Art by Vasileios Marinis. I wanted to read from chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 is the invention of traditions, Jewish and Christian Apocrypha, Jewish apocalyptic literature, the traditional understanding of Sheol, which was simple and unadorned, is skewed by Jewish apocalyptic literature, which tends to revel in detailed descriptions of the afterlife of souls. Many elements found in these texts would become standard in Christianity, including a provisional judgment, an intermediate state in which the souls await the last judgment, and a hope for the punishment of the wicked and the reward of the righteous. The most important Jewish literature, apocalypse, is First Enoch, which, along with Daniel, has been characterized as a formative document of Jewish apocalyptic tradition. First Enoch is a compilation of distinct works composed from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. Each layer of First Enoch recounts revelations made by angels to Enoch, a biblical patriarch from God, whom God took in Genesis 5:24. The first part and the oldest part, chapters 1 through 36, dating to the late 3rd or early 2nd century BCE, known as the Book of Watchers, including in its 22nd chapter a description of the temporary residences of the soul, the deep pits in which human spirits await the final day of judgment. Souls are separated according to their righteousness and various degrees of wickedness, and rewarded or punished accordingly. Such a separation implies some sort of provisional judgment that determines which souls go where. Enoch also sees the fiery prison of the fallen angels, for whom he had tried to intercede unsuccessfully, as well as a valley reserved for those who are eternally accursed, both places being precursors of the Christian conception of hell. A detailed account of a provisional judgment, along with a description of an intermediate state, is provided by a later text, the fragmentary apocalypse of Zephaniah, composed likely in Egypt sometime between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE. An angel escorts Zephaniah's soul and shows him how angels write down in manuscripts the good deeds and the sins of men. Zephaniah sees angels who are repulsive in appearance, crying off the souls of the ungodly. A terrifying demon sets up court and represents Zephaniah, a scroll on which all his sins are recorded. The text, lacunos, at this point, likely included a description of a corresponding scroll with Zephaniah's good deeds held by the angel Jeremiah. Zephaniah is eventually vindicated. He mentions the weighing of one's goods and bad deeds on a balance, then visits the place where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Enoch, Elijah, and David reside, and sees the souls of the ungodly being tormented at the bottom of Hades. Saints intercede on behalf of the damned. The expected final judgment signals an intermediate state of the souls. These ideas about the afterlife are not original or even particular to Judaism. Many motives, including a judicial process after death, a dangerous journey through gates guarded by terrifying creatures, an examination of records, and the weighing of deeds, are present in Egypt through the Roman period. The Homeric Hades also had many similarities with Sheol. In time, the Greeks developed notions of punishment and reward in the afterlife, seen most notably in the Orphic traditions and in Plato's Gorgias and the Republic. At the end of the latter text, for example, Socrates recounts the myth of in which the souls of the dead are subject to judgment based on the scrutiny of the records that the souls carry with them. 10.614 through 10.621. Such concepts continued through the Hellenistic and Roman periods. A work like the Book of Watchers is the product of a thoroughly Hellenized context. Other ideas in Judaism may be the result of influences from the ancient Near East and Persia. However, the mechanics of such exchanges between the Jews and surrounding peoples are difficult to trace. Antecedents, notwithstanding the Jewish apocalyptic adaptation and reformulation of these concepts were the primary influence on early Christian and consequently Byzantine beliefs. First Enoch is quoted in the Epistle to Jude, 1:14 through 15, with an allusion to Enochic material in verse 6. Other New Testament authors, including Mark, Matthew, and Paul, seem to be familiar with it. The text was also known to some apologists, such as Justin and Athenagoras, and the other church fathers, such as Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Epiphanius. Furthermore, some Jewish apocrypha circulated much later. First Enoch was used by Christian and Byzantine chronographers, especially George the Syncylos after 810, who included some extracts in his work. The Apocalypse of Zephaniah is mentioned by later sources, including the so-called Stichometry of Patriarch Nikephoros in 828, a catalogue of works appended to his chronography. Setting the stage, the Apocalypse of Paul. Early Christian apocalyptic texts drew heavily from these Jewish antecedents. All the traditions of the provisional judgment and the intermediate state are similarly contained by the 3rd or 4th century Apocalypse of Paul, upon which later authors would elaborate. The Apocalypse was written in Greek, likely in Egypt, and was translated into several languages, including Latin, Syriac, Coptic, and Ethiopic. Its vision of the afterlife was influential, particularly in the West. In fact, the Latin translation is the closest to the original. The surviving Greek is an abbreviated version. The Apocalypse of Paul elaborates on the apostles' heavenly journey, mentioned in 2 Corinthians 12:2. The text's main goal is evident at the beginning: avoid sin and repent. So the Lord instructs Paul to tell his people to repent. Paul sees angels bringing to God the deeds of men, whatever each did, from morning until evening, whatever good or bad, at the end of the day. As Paul ascends with an angel who serves as his guide, he notices various beings under the firmament. I saw in the same place power, and there was their oblivion, which deceives and draws down to itself the hearts of men, and the spirit of detraction, slander, and the spirit of fornication, and the spirit of madness, wrath, and the spirit of insolence. And then, and there were the princes of vices. Paul also sees some terrifying angels, those dispatched to the souls of the sinners at the time of death, and other angels whose faces shine like the sun. The latter wear golden girdles and carry awards. They are dispatched to the souls of the righteous. When Paul expresses his desire to see how both the sinners and the righteous leave the world, his angelic guide obliges, starting with the soul of a righteous person. And behold, all his deeds stand in front of him at the time of his need. And both benevolent and wicked angels came to his side, and the wicked ones found no place in him. But the benevolent angels took possession of the soul of the righteous man, and said to it, Know the body from which you exited, because you should again return to it at the day of resurrection, so you can receive what God promised the righteous. In the Greek version, the soul immediately ascends to the place prepared for the righteous. In the Latin, however, the soul's guardian angel joins the benevolent angels. They all advise the soul to be courageous. Their upward journey is interrupted by a wicked angel who says, Where are you running to, O soul? And do you dare to enter heaven? Wait and let us see if there is anything of ours in you, and behold, we find nothing in you. At last, the soul is brought to worship God. After a brief presentation of the soul's virtues, God instructs Michael to take it to the paradise of joy. The angelic being sings hymns and glorifies God in his justice. Predictably, Paul sees the wicked angels take the sinner's soul. The guardian angel runs in advance of the cortege, lamenting the outcome and reminding everyone that he was the one recording the person's sins every day. In a passage that is preserved only in Latin, the soul is again stopped by the powers. A burden was imposed upon it above all other burdens. Error and oblivion and murmuring met it, and the spirit of fornication and the rest of the powers, and said to it, Where are you going with, wretched soul? And do you dare to rush into heaven? Hold that we may see if we can find any of our characteristics in you, since we do not see. that you have a holy helper. The guardian angel takes the soul to God, who judges it and gives it to the angel Timalukas to be cast to outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, and the angelic beings again proclaim God's exact justice. After a subsequent courtroom scene in which another soul is condemned, the angel takes Paul on a tour of the abodes of the righteous. The pair first arrives at a gate, on top of which are two plaques inscribed with the names of those still alive, who are righteous and who serve God. When they pass through the gates, Enoch welcomes them and embraces Paul. The angel then shows Paul the land of the meek, where the souls of the righteous are kept. It is filled with bountiful trees. Paul then sees the lake Archuricia, where the archangel Michael cleanses the souls of sinners who have repented. Paul and the angel proceed to the city of God, which the angel later explains is the heavenly Jerusalem. The city is enclosed by 12 towers and 4 rivers. Outside of it stands a group of weeping monks. They are there, the angel explains, because of their pride. When Christ returns to the city, those coming with him will intercede on their behalf, and they will enter as well. Inside the city, Paul sees the prophets, the patriarchs, and the various righteous people. There is an altar in the middle of the city near which David sings and plays the harp. The angel then shows Paul the fate of the damned. Paul describes several grotesque punishments for a variety of sinners, including sinful clergy, fornicators, slanderers, and thieves. Paul weeps bitterly in response. The archangel Gabriel then arrives with his angels, and the tormented souls ask him to intercede. Christ appears, and due to the intercessions of Gabriel and Paul, agrees to offer respite to the tormented on Sundays. After this, the angel takes Paul on a tour of paradise, where Adam and Eve lived. He meets several people there, including Mary, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other notables. After Paul encounters Elijah, both the Greek and Latin versions end abruptly. Thus, the Apocalypse of Paul offers a comprehensive picture of the afterlife. It contains nearly all the elements that would become standard in later accounts of the afterlife, and it presents these events in a sequence that would become canonical. At the time of death, both benevolent and wicked angels appear. The dying person is presented with his or her deeds. Angels carry the soul upward on the way. Demonic powers stop the soul to see if it owes them something. The soul is presented in the tribunal of God. Hades is a place of vicious punishment. The locations for there are more than one. Of the saints, the righteous are brilliant, architecturally defined, and lushly planted. Finally, the intercession of saints and angels offer respite to those in Hades. Paul is clearly indebted to the Jewish literature, such as 1 Enoch and the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, the New and Old Testaments, and related texts for its descriptions of the departure of souls from the body, its ascent and judgment, the intermediate state, and the description of the promised land and the paradise. Its description of the torments is heavily influenced by the Apocalypse of Peter, a 2nd century text that recounts a vision granted to the apostles of their brethren in the next world and of their rewards, as well as the punishments in hell. Ultimately, this text traces its origins to the Greek and Jewish tours of hell. However, Paul contains some peculiarities, such as the process of judgment. One's destiny is decided essentially at the deathbed. Benevolent angels are sent to the righteous and the wicked to sinners. In both cases, the dying person sees all of his or her deeds, and the names of the righteous that are inscribed above heaven's gate also point to a predetermined fate, at least for some. The sequence of events after one's death, the passing through the powers of the air, and God's pronouncements of judgment reinforce the original verdict and are in reality superfluous. The reason for such redundancy is rather simple. The author of the Apocalypse attempted to harmonize, somewhat unsuccessfully, various existing traditions. Judgment at deathbed and subsequent delivery to either benevolent or wicked angels, depending on the outcome, is found in the Apocalypse of Zephaniah. The souls passing through the powers of the air stems from the Christian exegesis of Ephesians 2:2 and related passages. Finally, descriptions of judgment and the throne of God are based on New Testament imagery such as Matthew 25:31-46, and its mainly Jewish antecedents. The Apocalypse of Paul sets the stage for later developments that have not yet been fully investigated. The text was known to Patriarch Nicephorus I, who condemned it. However, two very popular Middle Byzantine texts, the Apocalypse of the Theotokos and that of Anastasia, both composed between the 9th and 11th centuries, are its offspring. As Jane Bond argues, both the patriarchal censure and the two apocalypses indicate a surge of interest in the Apocalypse of Paul in the 9th and 10th centuries. This, however, implies neither a direct connection between this apocalypse and later related texts, although there might have been one, nor a linear development of concepts from the 3rd century into the Byzantine period. Paul rather is a convenient combination of what were, at the time, the dominant traditions concerning provisional judgment. Subsequent authors made use of the same or similar traditions, developed them to suit their agendas, and created, as we shall see, a mosaic of dizzying variety. Now I'm going to read chapter 2, The Diversity of the Afterlife and Late Antiquity. The Provisional Judgment. Even the most cursory overview of late antiquity sources testifies that the coexistence of various ideas about the provisional judgment. The most persistent traditions can be divided roughly into two categories: those that place the judgment at one's deathbed, and those that postpone it until the soul's ascent. Both are already found side by side in the Apocalypse of Paul. The third kind of judgment found in Paul, the one at the throne of Christ, is virtually absent from late antiquity sources, likely because it provided less fodder for dramatic narratives than did the other two. Though the categories can be identified and observed, it will quickly become evident that it is impossible to trace a comprehensive development of ideas surrounding the personal judgment. And the borders of each tradition are porous, I think that's what it says, and their contents mutable. Unrestrained by conciliar decrees and with little guidance from Scripture, authors picked and choose whatever story suited their purpose for the same reasons they felt free to add and subtract, merge elements from different traditions, or even ignore them altogether. Judgment in the air. The most widespread description in late antiquity of the judgment of the soul is the one that places the judgment at its ascent. The earliest elaboration is found in Origen, 254. He interprets John 14:30, "For the prince of this world is coming. He has no hold over me," as referring to the demons who sit at the end of the world and who, after one's death, diligently examine whether anything in the dead person belongs to them. The word, there's a Greek word here, can't pronounce it. I think it means that demons, which includes a person who purchases from the state of the rights to taxes, as is a practice also known as tax farming, is usually rendered as tax collector. However, a more accurate translation in the context of the New Testament and in Origen would be of toll collector, which specifies the type of tax and can indicate both the contractor and those employed at the toll houses. Stationary locations along roads. Origen's characterizations of the air demons as toll collectors make an abstract concept tangible by anchoring it to a real-world situation, paying tolls. That would have been familiar to his audience. In doing so, he also underscores the unpleasantness of the process. In antiquity, toll collectors were renowned and reviled for their flagrant abuses. Even though in the New Testament they appear occasionally as examples of penitence, other passages such as Matthew 5:46 through 47, 18:15 through 17 cast him in a very negative light. In his fifth homily on Psalm 36:37, which has survived only in Latin, Origen gives a more detailed description of the process. At the time when the soul separates from the body, it is encountered by wicked demons, adverse powers, the spirits of this air, who want to retain it and turn it towards them. If they recognize something in it belonging to them and to their actions, the prince of the world and the aerial powers Come to every soul that exits this world and inquire if there is something in it that belongs to them. If they find avarice, it belongs to them. If they find anger, lust, envy, and other such similar things, it belongs to them, and they claim it and drag it towards them and divert it towards their company of sinners. But if somebody has imitated him who said, "For the prince of this world is coming, he has no hold over me," if he had any such notice, such wicked angels will come anyway, and having searched him and found nothing that belongs to them, they will nonetheless try to remove him to their own party, but the Lord will deliver him from the wicked angels. The similarities with the Apocalypse of Paul are evident. R.P. Casey, based on a 13th century testimony, argued that Origen was acquainted with this apocalypse, an opinion that has been challenged. Indeed, the names of the powers in Origen do not correspond fully to those in the Apocalypse of Paul. More important, the process of judgment is different. Very much unlike the Apocalypse of Paul, Origen describes powers taking the souls of sinners with them, without God's involvement. It is therefore more likely that both Origen and Paul drew from a common tradition, which in its most primitive form contended that the soul was stopped during its ascent by demons inhabiting the air, an idea based on Ephesians 2:2. The differences between Origen and the Apocalypse of Paul are the result of the embellishment, argumentation, and manipulation of the basic story by which each author, because both these texts and many others originate in or around Egypt, and has been argued that this was a Christian Egyptian tradition which eventually circulated widely. This basic narrative was quickly elaborated upon, resulting in various versions, sometimes even in the same text. For example, demons in the air appear in the 4th century Life of Antony, composed by Athanasius, Archbishop of Alexandria, in 373. In a vision, Antony sees himself being carried in the air by angels. He is soon stopped by some bitter and terrible beings who stand in the air and who quarrel with the angels, asking whether Antony is accountable to them. Although the demons want an accounting of Antony's life from the time he was born, the angels reply that God has wiped clean everything until the time he became a monk. Because the demons would not prove anything, the passage becomes free and unobstructed. Though this story is thin on details, it contains the essential motive: the demons in the air who demand an account of a person's deeds to see whether they are owed something. In the same chapter, Antony reflects on the difficulty of the soul's passage and quotes Ephesians 2:2 to explain the role of the demons in his vision. Antony has, in the next chapter, no less, another relevant vision after a discussion with a visitor about the soul's passage. Antony sees the devil, enormous, unsightly, and terrible, standing and reaching to the clouds. He also sees souls ascending as if they had wings. The devil extends his hands and keeps back some souls, while others pass by without concern. He rejoices at the former and gnashes his teeth at the latter. Antony realizes that the devil keeps those who are accountable to him. The vision provides Antony to strive more in the spiritual life. Athanasius presents these two distinct visions without any suspicion of self-consciousness or contradiction. The only reason for this must be that both stories were circulating at the time of his writing. Athanasius wanted to be nothing but thorough in his reports of the afterlife. A latter text provides more details about the judgment during the soul's ascent. In the 7th century Life of John Inglemon, Patriarch of Alexandria, 619-620, the author Leontios of Neapolis, 7th century, tells us that John conversed often about the memory of death and the exit of the soul, especially during times of pestilence, hunger, and Lent. John believed that the best road to salvation was to remember death. How one would have to rebuke the wild animals of the reeds. Psalms 67, 68, 31. Pass through the Tollhouses and be called to account by bitter and merciless auditors. He then quotes Saint Simon the Stylite and describes a process whereby, as the soul ascends, it is met by bands of demons, each specializing in a category of sin. The demons grope the soul to see if it has something belonging to them. Leontius mentions that John spoke of the Tollhouses to people who came to him in a prideful appearance and smiling face, and turned them into humble people with eyes filled with tears. Evidently, such animated descriptions of demonic bands were effective in encouraging people to mend their ways. Judgment at deathbed. The Apocalypse of Paul implies that some sort of judgment takes place at one's deathbed. Therefore, benevolent or wicked angels appear, along with the dying person's deeds. Paul, however, offers no further details, and it is only in latter texts that we find the particulars of this process. The aforementioned Life of John Elimon contains the story of an African toll collector named Peter, famous for being merciless. Peter is close to death because of an illness. He has a dream in which he is called to account, and his deeds are being weighed in the scales of a balance manned by angels and demons. The motive of scales here is particularly effective as a literary image of judgment. The multitude of the toll collectors' wicked deeds piled up on the side of the demons is balanced by a single piece of white bread that Peter threw at a beggar because he could not find a rock, thus committing an act, even unwillingly, of charity. Peter wakes up after this dream and changes his ways dramatically. The central element in Peter's story is the weighing of one's good deeds against the bad at the deathbed. Scholars have traced the provenance of this motive as early as the Iliad. However, as J. Gwynne Griffiths has noted, in both instances, Zeus uses the golden scales to compare the imminent fates of people, not their destiny after death, and the scales result is unrelated to the ethical behavior. The post-mortem weighing ultimately originates in Egypt, ancient Egypt, the Book of the Dead, a collection of writings offering guidance to the deceased in the afterlife, describing the weighing of the heart, which contain both the good and the bad deeds of a person by the god Anubis, against the feather of truth. And depending on the outcome, the person either continued into the next world or was destroyed. John Day has argued convincingly that Hebrew wisdom literature, particularly Proverbs, is influenced by the Egyptian imagery of weighing. Echoes of it can be found elsewhere in the Old Testament. Job asked God to place him on a just balance, and Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is placed on a scale and is found wanting in Daniel 5:27. A judgment of deeds on a scale is mentioned in 1 Enoch 61, and other apocryphal texts. Early Christian and medieval authors use this motive as a metonymy for God's just punishment. Gregory of Nazianzus, 390, for example, writes in one of his poems that I only tremble in the fear for the unblemished balance of God. Basil of Caesarea encourages his audience to think of their souls as standing in a balance pulled by angels on one side and demons on the other. And in a homily on penitence, Asterios of Amasea, between 420 and 425, encourages his flock to avoid being judgmental so that they will escape condemnation. When their life is weighed like a balance, in a balance at the judgment of God, Cassia, between 843 through and 867, asks God to be unjust when he weighs over deeds in the balance and to tip the scales in his favor. The connection between balances and judgment is also found in the Oneriokritikon of Akhmet, an early 10th century book on dream interpretation. Athanasius of Cinna, after 700, recounts a story similar to that of Peter. The protagonist in this case is the leader of a band of thieves living during the reign of the Emperor Maurice in 602. The thief eventually moves to Constantinople, and at his deathbed in the hospital of Samson, he repents. As he begs God fervently for forgiveness, he uses his kerchief to wipe his tears. While the thief is in the throes of death, a visiting chief physician has a dream in which he sees Ethiopians approaching the thief's bed holding many documents that contain his sins. The demons heap the document on the scales of the balance, tipping it strongly in their favor. The angels have nothing to counter, but they search the thief's bed and find his tear-stained kerchief. They decide to place it on the other scale and to have hope in God's benevolence. This indeed tips the scales in their favor. The angels take the soul and ascend. The chief physician awakes and runs to the thief's bed, finding the body still warm and the kerchief on his eyes. The mechanics of such a weighing are explained in some detail in a homily spuriously attributed to John of Damascus. According to this text, the person's deeds are placed on a balance at their last breath. If the right scale is heavier, the soul goes to the angels. If the balance is equal, or if it tilts only slightly to the left, the benevolence of God prevails. If it tilts heavily to the left, then nothing can be done. Although the weighing of these was the most popular understanding of the deathbed judgment, another one existed as well. John Clements, 650, offers a different tradition about the deathbed judgment. He recounts a spiritually beneficial tale of a certain hermit named Stephen who was distinguished in his asceticism. One day before he died, he went into ecstasy, and with his eyes open he was turning to the left and to the right of the bed, and as if some people called him into account, he was saying, while at all present could hear sometimes, "Yes, indeed, it is true, but I have fasted thus many years for it." Then again, "No, indeed, you are lying, this I do not do." And again, "Yes, truly, yes, yes, but I shed tears and paid service." And again, "No, you are wholly slandering me." And sometimes he would say, "Yes, truly, yes, and I do not know what to say to this. In God there is mercy." John calls this process calling to account. As in previous cases, the author here makes this process a reality for his audience by connecting it to a common experience, namely attendance at a trial where many defendants had to answer the accusations for themselves. Interestingly, John leaves the outcome of this particular case uncertain. This story is found in the 7th chapter of John's Ladder of Paradise, an influential treatise on monastic spirituality. The ladder is divided into 30 steps, each dedicated to a virtue, and in this case the joyful mourning. John argues that joyful mourning should be amongst constant companion, because salvation, even for a seasoned ascetic like Stephen, is unsure. These stories of the deathbed judgment depict a rather straightforward process. At the conclusion of the weighing of the deeds or of the court proceedings, one soul goes either with angels or demons without further incident. These stories also provide a solution to a vexing problem of the provisional judgment, namely what happens at one's deathbed, when both angels and demons appear left vague in the apocalypse of Paul. Combinations and migrations. That the judgment at deathbed was a tradition separate from the Tollhouses is evident in most early sources, where only one or the other is attested, with very few exceptions. An attempt to combine the two judgments into one narrative is found in a homily on the exit of the soul and the second coming attributed to Cyril of Alexandria, 444. The homily contains the most detailed account of death and the afterlife in late antiquity. At the time of death, Cyril writes, "The soul feels fear and terror. Heavenly armies and powers arrive, and with them the adverse powers, the rulers of darkness, the emperors of wickedness, the controllers of the customs, the auditors, the tax inspectors of the air. Along with these comes the devil, the great dragon, the ruler of the power of darkness, who, as if in a trial, examines and takes account of each of the dying person's deeds. The terrified soul flees for refuge to the angels, who ascend with it through the air. But various tollhouses, each dedicated to a particular sin, hamper the soul's progress. Cyril details the first 5 tollhouses dedicated to the sins of the senses, and mentions by name several others, claiming that each sin and passion has its own. The angels offered the person's good deeds to the demons in each tollhouse, hoping that they will be sufficient payment. If they are, then the soul proceeds to the place of the ineffable joy. If not, the soul is received by Ethiopian demons, who, beating it without mercy, bring it down to the earth, that is, to Hades. Cyril attempts to combine two evidently coexisting traditions, a provisional judgment that happens at one's deathbed and another at the Tollhouses. Cyril's text is not so much a harmonization as a juxtaposition of the two narratives, largely unsuccessful. It's largely unsuccessful as indicated in the awkward transition from one episode to another. From one episode to another, the pompous arrivals of demons and the devil are described in great detail and almost with relish, and the devil's examination of the soul's deeds remain without a conclusion and without purpose. The terrified soul simply flees to the angels as an act that initiates its passage through the Tollhouses. Nevertheless, this homily is of great importance, as Cyril connects the provisional judgment with the settling of accounts more explicitly than any other author. He names the demons after petty officials, with the aim, no doubt, to make his description clear and vivid by mining his audience's personal experiences with the local bureaucracy. Such experiences would have been plentiful in a society in which justice and finance were inextricably connected. Furthermore, as if Cyril's multitudinous accounts were not enough, he characterizes these demons as Ethiopians. His is one of the earliest usages of this motive. Descriptions of demons as black in general and as Ethiopian in particular are common in late antiquity. The idea certainly originated in Egypt on a most basic level. Darkness and black are the opposite of light and white. A differentiation that is made clear in both the Old and New Testament, Genesis 1:3-4 and 1 Thessalonians 5:5, Revelation 6:11, 7:13, and in later Christian literature. Ethiopians in the Roman Empire were at one end of the spectrum in terms of skin color, and from the perspective of monastic authors, they embodied an extreme alterity. Historical circumstances might have strengthened the identification of demons with Ethiopians in Egypt. Ethiopian, that is, sub-Saharan groups, attacked Egyptian settlements starting in the 2nd century CE. It is also likely that in many texts, including Cyril's, the word refers not to an ethnic group, but it is taken literally as burnt-faced. Sometimes narrative elements migrate from one context to the other in order to clarify the process of judgment. For example, the motive of the weighing of deeds was transferred to explain what happens at the examination of the soul. This is found in a story about a Carthaginian surgeon, first recorded by Athanasius of Cinna. The surgeon dies from the plague and is buried in a nearby monastery. A few hours after his burial, the monks hear a voice coming from the surgeon's tomb. Upon opening it, they find the surgeon alive and ask him to recount what he saw. The surgeon replies that at the time of his death he saw that the usual Ethiopians and 2 angels. The latter pair took his soul and went through the Tollhouses, each of which was dedicated to a particular sin, which I was being held by one of them. The sergeant says, I beheld my guides holding as in a purse of all my deeds, whatever good things I had done, and from them they took out and counterbalanced the wicked deeds put forth by the toll collectors of the air. The sergeant spent all of his credit before reaching the toll house of fornication, which is near the gates of heaven. The Ethiopians then took his soul, beat it, and dragged it down to the earth, which split open and allowed them to descend towards Hades. After intense pleading, the 2 angels who had in the meantime reappeared in Hades decided to give the sergeant another chance. This story enjoyed wide circulation. George the Monk repeats it in his 9th century chronicle with some minor alterations. Michael Blycus, 12th century, also includes it in his chronicle in an abbreviated form. Other possibilities, in addition to these texts, there are many others throughout the late antique period that allude to traditions or remain vague about the specifics of the provisional judgment, including perhaps a reluctance to take up a subject for which there is little information in Scripture. Basil Cicero, for example, in his homily on Psalm 7 mentions that the brave athletes of Christ are examined by the ruler of the age. This is perhaps a distinct echo of the aerial Tollhouses. If the athletes are found with sin, they will be retained. If they are found blameless, they will rest under Christ. John Chrysostom delivered several homilies on the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. In the second homily, he asserts that the soul of the righteous, like that of Lazarus, are immediately taken away by angels, and the souls of the wicked, however, are required by certain terrible powers, perhaps sent for this purpose. Chrysostom also reports that some in his flock believe that the souls of those who die a violent death become demons. In his celestial hierarchy, Pseudo-Dionysius, maybe CA 500 perhaps, completely ignores any provisional judgment and places the fate of each soul, exclusively on the individual's deeds. He writes that those who lead a holy life arrive at death with a divine joy because they know that theirs will be an utter resurrection and that it will come amid complete and unending life and salvation. Sinners, however, leave this life pitifully and uncertainly because there is no sacred hope to guide them. Like Chrysostom, Pseudo-Dionysius reports on false beliefs about the afterlife, such as the eternal existence of the soul without the body, the assignment of the other bodies to souls, and the beatitude promised to the saints being of the same kind as a worldly happiness. Such a list is yet another indication of the coexistence of multiple traditions. Eustratios, after 602, a presbyter in Constantinople who wrote a treatise on the postmodern state of the soul, seems to believe that after death saints go directly to heaven and sinners to Hades, although he denies the existence of a provisional judgment. In one of his letters, Maximus the Confessor, 662, indicates without much elaboration his belief in the demons of the air who examine the soul after death. Finally, in a homily spuriously attributed to Macarius of Alexandria, two angels explain to Macarius that the soul is being judged by the knowledge of its deeds, even before it appears before Christ, who decides on the place where it is to be guarded. Based on the soul's deeds, Macarius is virtually the only text in which Christ is the agent of the provisional judgment. A special mention should be made of an additional source, the Apophthegmata Patrum, a collection of sayings and stories about 4th and 5th century Egyptian monks that circulated widely in Byzantium. The Apophthegmata contained little about the afterlife and even less about the provisional judgment and the intermediate state. In some cases, the monks believed that after death they would be immediately with God, who would issue a decision about their fate. In one's vision, a monk meets his mother at the judgment. She is surprised to see him there because she had tried unsuccessfully to prevent him from becoming a monk. And we are told that he prevailed because he wanted to save his soul. It is unclear whether the story is referred to the provisional or the last judgment. Nevertheless, its implications is that some, that is, the righteous, will not have to undergo it. Indeed, in some cases, angels take the soul directly to heaven, and at the same time of his death, Sisos sees his angels, Anthony, choruses of prophets and apostles, and finally Christ. There is only a distant echo of the Tollhouses in a story of two brothers, one of whom has a vision in which angels take the brothers to heaven despite the efforts of the adverse powers. An extraordinary variety. The texts that I have discussed so far present an extraordinary variety of options pertaining to the provisional judgment. Some traditions, such as the giant Satan, who hampers the ascent of the souls in the life of Anthony, die out. Many others continue to appear, including the decision at one's deathbed by an examination of weighing of deeds, or a logothesium, one determined during the soul's journey through the tollhouses of the air, of which that of fornication is the most challenging, and even on occasion one made by God at no specific time. We can trace the origins of these diverse traditions to their biblical and apocryphal antecedents. But how do we account for their persistence? The texts that incorporate these traditions are clearly didactic. Their style is simple and unadorned, and their content has an intrinsic truth, value combined with attention to detail that enhances their plausibility. The authors paint a frightening image of the afterlife with the goal of inspiring repentance and dedication to a virtuous life. Cyril writes that even seeing demons who come to claim one's soul is harder to bear than all subsequent punishments. Chrysostom notes that his audience fell silent after hearing his description of angels and demons claiming the soul, and hopes that reflection on these matters would make them more chaste. John Wilmon talks about the bands of demons who grope the soul as a means to inspire humility in prideful people. Anthony, according to his biographer, strove to better himself after his visions of the afterlife. After the Carthaginian sergeant returns from death to recount his story, he repents. Because the purpose of these texts is edification, each author chooses the vision of the afterlife he considers more effective. This is particularly evident in the stories of Peter, the toll collector, and the life of John Uliman, and that of the thief and Anastasios of Cinna. In the former, Peter's sins are balanced by a piece of bread he threw at a beggar, and the latter by the thief's tear-soaked kerchief. In both cases, the angels bring documentation of the protagonist's good deeds, while the demons bring his sins. In another story from Anastasios of Cinna, however, the manuscript with the sins is carried by the angels who destroy it, after the dying monk claims that he should not be condemned because he had not passed judgment on anyone after being tonsured. Because the angels are generally conceived of as the primary agents of the provisional judgment, it is appropriate in this context for them to carry and tear up the documentation of the monk's sins. In Pseudo John of Damascus, the different outcomes of the weighings are meant to be evidence of God's mercy. He would save the soul even if the scales tip slightly to the left. John Climax uses the story of Stephen the hermit, whose logothesion occurred before he died, and in the presence of witnesses, thus guaranteeing its truthfulness, to claim that even accomplished ascetics can be called to account. Cyril and others, in presenting the demons of the air as petty toll collectors and accountants, ground the post-mortem journey in everyday experiences. All of these stories continue to be recited, reworked, repeated, because they suited in different ways the motivations of each author. The intermediate state in late antiquity. At the conclusion of the provisional judgment, the souls of the righteous and those of the wicked await Christ's second coming in separate locations, most often called paradise and Hades. Before, however, delving further into the intermediate state, we must make a short digression of Christ's descent into Hades, which precipitated the existence of two distinct locations for the souls. The New Testament implies Christ's descent and its outcome, but supplies few details. Christ, for example, claimed that he would fulfill the sign of Jonah, Matthew 12:38-41, 16:4, Luke 11:29-32, but by spending 3 days and 3 nights in Hades. Christ conquered Hades, Revelations 1:18. He preached to the imprisoned spirits and to all the dead, 1 Peter 3:19-4-6, and he delivered the righteous, Matthew 27:51-53. Now, these primitive traditions were elaborated upon most famously in the so-called Gospel of Nicodemus, and eventually institutionalized. Byzantine theologians do not always agree about the details of Christ's sojourn in Hades, but they generally consider it to have been an extension of his salvific work on earth. Christ raised both those who believed in him and dispelled the need for all souls to go to Hades, which was relegated only to the souls of the wicked. Most pertinent to our purposes, Christ reopened paradise. The concept of an intermediate state of the souls, is found in Jewish apocryphal literature and is also present in the New Testament. The term, however, does not immediately reveal its underlying complexities. The most significant difficulty is definitional. Although the New Testament differentiates between Hades, where the ungodly await until the general resurrection, and Gehenna, where they are thrown after the last judgment, later authors blur the distinction. For instance, the Apocalypse of Paul describes the punishments of the wicked before the second coming. Most of these punishments, however, are taken from the earlier Apocalypse of Peter, where they follow the general resurrection. In another example, Cyril of Alexandria moves from the outcome of the provisional to that of the last judgment so seamlessly that it is impossible to distinguish between the two. If there is a difference, it is not immediately evident. Another complication arises from the lack of general consensus about the nature of the intermediate state. Even in the same author, for example, Origen's views on what happens after the provisional judgment are inconsistent. In some of his writings, he suggests that all souls go to Hades, where there are places better or worse, depending on one's deeds. In other cases, however, Origen argues that the souls of saints are not enclosed in Hades, but go directly to God. Gregory of Nyssa, after 394, offers a markedly different narrative. In a dialogue on the soul and resurrection, he discusses the fate of the souls with his sister Macrina, who is on her deathbed. Macrina claims that the bosom of Abraham in Hades in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus should not be taken literally, for the soul is bodiless. Furthermore, she maintains that the relationship between the rich man and his family may signify what happens to the unpurified souls of those who are too attached to earthly pleasures. They stay near their tombs after death. At her last prayer, however, as narrated by Gregory in her Vita, Macrina asked Christ to send beside her a shining angel to lead her to a place of refreshment, where there is a water of repose near the bosoms of the Holy Fathers. The most influential text about the geography of the afterlife in Byzantium is Pseudo-Athanasios' Questions de Antiquity Ducem, a series of questions and answers on matters of faith, likely composed in the 7th or early 8th century. It is worth quoting extensively because it provides a clear exposition of the Orthodox Church's official position even today, which is question 19. Where then do we want to say that the souls of the deceased are? The answer, this question is unusual and formidable and hidden from mankind, for God does not allow anyone to return to us from there and describe where or how are the souls who have departed from us. But from the scriptures we learn that the souls of the sinners are in Hades below, and the whole earth and the sea. The souls of the righteous, on the other hand, after Christ's arrival on earth, are in paradise, as we learn from the thief on the cross, because Christ our God did not open paradise just for the soul of the one holy of the holy thief, but for all of the rest of the souls of saints. Question 20. Then the righteous have received good things and the sinners punishment? Answer, not at all. Nevertheless, the souls of the saints have this joy, and this is a partial enjoyment. Like the sorrow that the sinners have is a partial punishment. It is like when the emperor summons his friends to eat together, and in like manner he summons the condemned to punish them. Those invited to lunch await in front of the emperor's house in delight until the time comes, but the condemned, shut up in prison, remain sorrowful until the judge comes. Thus we should think about the souls of the deceased, of both the righteous and the sinners. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Pseudo-Athanasios continues, should not be taken literally, because it would not be possible for sinners in Gehenna to see the righteous with Abraham. Indeed, it would be impossible to see anyone, because they live in darkness. The souls of the saints remember those who are still alive, but those who are the sinners do not. They are concerned about their expected punishment. Furthermore, the souls of the saints, through the operations of the Holy Spirit, praise God and rejoice with angels in the land of the living. The souls, according to the author, do not leave these places. His interlocutor objects, that saints often appear in churches dedicated to them and in their tombs. The visions of the saints, says Pseudo-Athanasios, occurs not through their souls but through holy angels, who change their form to look like the saints. Otherwise, how would it be possible for the one single soul of Peter or Paul to appear in thousands of their churches throughout the world at the same time? Pseudo-Athanasios offers an elegant and symmetrical description of the intermediate state. The souls of the saints and the righteous go to paradise, while those of sinners go to Hades, but in both cases they experience only a foretaste of what is to come after the last judgment. Although he does not use this exact terminology, Pseudo-Athanasios elaborates on an idea that is present in embryonic form in the New Testament, a temporary residence in paradise or Hades, succeeded after the parousia by the joining of the kingdom of God, or an eternal residence in Gehenna. In this way, Pseudo-Athanasios is able to explain a vexing problem, namely the means of rewarding and punishment souls between death and the second coming. This Shema became the dominant interpretation in Byzantium and beyond, assisted by the attribution of this text to the authority of Athanasius of Alexandria. A virtually identical theology is found in the Kephalia of Anastasios of Sina, a work of the same date that likely comes from the same milieu. It is, however, in the Middle Byzantium period that the particulars of paradise and Hades are made explicit. And then the chapter 3, I'll read that one later.